experience here as the kind of the ground of our doing theology, or the ground of our theologizing. And why do we start with human experience? And why not start with not simply saying, let's start with the dogma of faith, or which start with
I,
what the church believes. Uh, what happens when we start with the dogma of faith? It's almost always a top-down kind of what do you call this? A learning. We have a dogma of faith, which is considered something like essential or absolute, and all we have to do is apply it into our own lives and into our own praxis, into our own practice in life. Uh, when we do it that way, it is almost as if we regard the formulation of that absolute truth as unchangeable, unchanging. When we do that, then we forget that historically those statements have a particular historical context, and you have to be able to understand the historical context and the language that people used during that time in order for you to be able to understand. So if you don't understand, it's probably because you don't understand the language or you don't understand the historical context. So it is not as absolute as sometimes we think the dogma of it. I'm not saying not absolute in the sense of we don't believe it. No, we believe it, but the expression of it is, of course, something that is always historically bound, something that is always time bound, and of course, culture bound, as we will find out a little bit later. Which means that if we talk about different cultures, a faith statement can be interpreted in different ways according to the culture that you belong. As we always say in Aristotelian philosophy, quid recipitur ad modum recipientis recipitur, whatever is received according to the mode of the receiver. So if we receive a dogma of faith, we need to understand first the context of the dogma, when it was formulated, when it was expressed. But then we also need to take into consideration our own culture, how we accept, and this is what is called the reception of the dogma. How do we receive it? What is the cultural framework that receives that dogmatic formulation? Okay, so sometimes you hear people say, "Oh, I don't understand the teaching of the church. I have to study it more. I need someone to explain it to me a bit more, or I need to have more faith. And even if I cannot understand it, I have to believe that it is." I think we are pretty much at a point now where we are able to say that if it's going to be a revelation, then it should be understandable, because if it is not understandable, then what's the purpose of revealing it to us? So in other words, we should be able to understand it even in our own culture. Say. So, so the traditional way is unidirectional, in other words, one directional, from top to bottom, from God to us believers. And we will soon find out that the dogmas are in fact articulations of a given culture. Thus, they are not absolute per se. They are always historically bound. And the process of experience and its interpretation goes always two ways, from top to bottom, from bottom to top. I mean, from we have an input to give to a faith articulation, and that input comes from our own culture, the receiving culture. Okay, now, why do we start with experience? We start with experience because it is the ground for both dogma of faith and its reception by us. In other words, we're really dealing with a similar kind of a ground, the ground for the dogma of faith as articulated by the fathers of the church, let's say, or by Thomas Aquinas, or by great theologians of our own time, but also our reception, our own cultural framework, whether we are in Myanmar, we are in the Philippines, we are in Europe, or we are in Africa or Latin America. So human experience is the common denominator. We speak of our own experience as something that is similar because we are human beings. So in very many ways, we are similar in our ways of thinking, in our ways of experiencing. And the processes and the dynamics at work in our human experience are most probably similar. And that's why we are able to talk about human experience in a kind of a universal way. There are still differences, and we will be pointing this out a little bit later. But there are still differences. But by and large, when we talk about the dynamics, the process itself of experience, we say they're all the same. So then we took up the idea of the relationship between the search for meaning and the search for truth. If something is meaningful, then we can go on to ask whether it is truthful. But if it is not meaningful, why do we need to ask whether it's truthful or not? I don't care if it is true or not. If it doesn't have any meaning to me, if it's not relevant to me, if it's not important to me, why do I have to worry about whether it's true or not? So the question of truth is always consequent to the question of meaning. If, for example, consubstantiality, the doctrine of consubstantiality is not important to me, why do I need to understand it? Why do I need to say whether it is true or false? All I have to do is just dismiss it. It's not important to me. But if it is important, because it is an explanation of what happens in the Eucharist, then, of course, I am going to, what is this? I am going to uh, accept it. I'm going to find the meaningfulness of it, and then I can ask whether it's true or not. Whether I would follow this kind of articulation or I would propose another way of articulation. Okay. Oops. So this is what we are taking up in chapter 5. Basically, in the first part, we're talking about the dynamics, the process in human experience, the relationship between experience, interpretation, language, and culture. In the second part, we talk about the human experience and faith. Faith is a kind of a human experience, but there is a difference between plain human experience and an experience that is of faith. We will show that a little bit later. In the third section of this chapter, we'll be talking about the context of human experience, society, and the institutions. What do we have in society, in the institutions that have somehow an influence on the way we have experience, as well as on the way we interpret our experience. Hopefully, in the fourth section, we will be talking about analysis, social analysis. Some of you probably are quite familiar with social analysis, not only from your courses in philosophy, but maybe even if you are exposed to BECs, because BEC do a lot of social analysis, or even in sociology, if you have taken sociology as a course in your college years, you probably have done some kind of social analysis. But here we're going to talk about discourse analysis. Very briefly, not really going to go too much at length on that, because it is a whole course altogether, because it is something to do with hermeneutics. But also we will try to see the relationship between theological articulation and philosophical articulation, how they work with each other actually, and sometimes the one clarifies the other. And fifthly, we were going to talk about human experience and our option for the poor, our option for the marginalized. In other words, the way we do theology here in SBST. As we say, we do theology from the point of view of the margins. All right, so let's go our program on chapter 5. Now, we have already taken this up, that's why I'm just going through it rather quickly. In the first section here, we talk about the relationship between experience and interpretation. Very, very often, we always think about interpretation and experience as two different instances. I think when we really try to analyze what experience is, the very experience itself is always interpreted already, whether it is something that is subconscious or unconsciously, or something that is subliminal. But there is also a kind of interpretation which comes later. This is what we would call a reflexive interpretation, which is like the second level of interpretation. That is what we normally understand by interpretation, the reflexive level, the interpretation of you step back and you try to see what is this trying to mean? What is this going? What is this trying to convey to me? What is this thing revealing to me? This particular experience. What is it saying to me? So that is now the second level of interpretation. But from the very start, when we say experience and interpretation go hand in hand, we notice it because all of us, everything that we perceive through our senses is always perceived through things that are already built in our own system, whether it is the matter of language itself or whether it's a matter of feeling, sense, perception, the touch, the taste, all of that is already built in us. So that when we taste something, we know exactly whether it's sweet or sour or whether it's bitter. Why are we and our senses almost react instantaneously? That is a form of interpretation. That is a form of interpretation already. So that what we receive, we are already receiving within the context of our own makeup of who we are. But for example, if it has to do with language, it has to be already received in terms of the language that we are born into. Some people, for example, would say, why do you call what is this table? Why do you call a mesa table when it is table? Do we use a table? Well, we use mesa because mesa is probably la mesa. That's probably the first language that we learned when we were being taught by our parents. But when we learn English, then we say that la mesa is equivalent to table. So there's already a second level of interpretation. Now, this is what we speak of as what is there being experienced by us is a given reality. It's there. It's outside of us. Or sometimes it is within us. But again, our mind reflects on it. So it is a given reality. So when we experience, for example, pain or sorrow or happiness, it is something that is there as a kind of a given reality, and we store that in our own, well, because in our own bank. We store it, and when we try to what do you call this, to process it, we're processing it according to what we know previously about experiences similar to that one. And this is what we call in a way the reservoir of knowledge. We are like we have a big reservoir within us, a big reservoir, and in it are all kinds of different sensations, thoughts, language, words, etc., ways of values, for example, manners of acting, etc. And then if somebody, for example, misbehaves, why do we say it's a misbehavior? Because according to how we were brought up, this is not the way to do things. This is not the way to act. If you are being unkind to older people, you always say, don't misbehave. Why do we do that? Even if the older people is wrong, we always do not say it out loud because we always defer to the older people and we owe him a particular respect because they are older. And where did we learn that? We learned it from when we were young. We were told by our parents, this is education. So that is part of the reservoir of knowledge. They provide us with interpretative elements and models of perceiving reality. Why do I speak the way I speak English? It's probably because of what is this, of my background. If I were brought up in another country, or maybe speaking another language, maybe I will be speaking with an accent of an Italian, an accent of a French, or an accent of what do you call it? Somebody from Texas, with a twang, or an accent from a Spanish-speaking Latin American, maybe a Peruvian or a Mexican. So that is part of who we are. Why is it if we speak sometimes English the way Americans, or the way English is speak, is because we are exposed to American what do you call this, influence. We A lot of people nowadays would speak American English because of the movies that they see. But there are also a few people who would speak British English. For example, the people in India, they would be more exposed to British English. So they would speak more like the British people. Even the way they put phrases, they would be more in line with British English. Okay, so this is what we're trying to say. To experience is to experience and interpret at the same time. Again, talking about interpretation here as the first level, something that is unexpressed, something almost that is subconscious, right? Something already that is so deeply in our consciousness that we don't advert to it. What do you call this? Consciously, it just happens. It just happens. Uh, I know, for example, some people. Uh, is He's a son of a friend of mine in Belgium, who is a Filipina who married to a Belgian. But the what is this Matthew? Matthew, that's his name. This is not Matthew El Nino, but Matthew. Uh, Matthew speaks very good, of course, Belgian, Flemish, but also speaks very good French because he studies French in school, and very good English. So, but he also speaks very good Bisaya, but not just any kind of Bisaya, but he speaks very good Bisaya in Southern Leyte, in Maasin. And the reason is because every summer he comes back with his mother for vacation, and he stays in Maasin, in Southern Leyte, and he speaks with his relatives, with his cousins in pure Bisaya. So if you listen to him, he speaks like Bisaya, uh, and it's very good because he's very what do you call it? Very capable of speaking a language in the language that's best understood by his what do you call this? By his friends and his relatives, his cousins. Well, if he were to speak, for example, French to them, of course, the people probably in Southern Leyte will not be able to understand him. But this is something that you gain when you are exposed to something new, and more especially when we are young. That's why they always say, if you want to learn a language, learn it when you are young, because it will come very easy for you, and even the pronunciation is going to be very easy because you have learned it from. You notice young people or children, they speak different languages, and they can speak many different languages almost as easily as one or two languages. And the reason for that is that there is something in our mind that knows how to compartmentalize what is French, what is English, what is Spanish, etc. Some of the teachers used to say, don't confuse the child because they will not be able to learn different languages. That's wrong. That's pedagogically, that is a wrong theory. In fact, you can expose the children to as many languages as he's capable, and he will not be confused. Things will come out in their own proper context. If he's speaking with Filipinos, he will speak Filipino or Tagalog. If he speaks with English people, he will speak in English. And it just comes out naturally. And it's very important to realize that that is exactly what happens to us. So when we interpret something, we actually interpret it according to what we have already gained as knowledge, and according to the reservoir of knowledge that we have. We process things that are being said to us. So we speak about interpretation having two levels: the first level and the second level. Most of us, we study philosophy, we study theology, or study sciences. We are now interpreting in the second level. For example, an astronomer who looks at a particular what do you call this formula, a physics formula, for example, automatically he's able to understand it because he has deep knowledge of it. For me to look at that formula, it doesn't mean anything to me because I will not be able to understand it. So this is the second level kind of what do you call this, interpretation or learning. Now, our interpretation, however, is constantly being critiqued, being corrected, being changed, or being renewed as it comes in contact with new experiences. For example, when we talk about what is up there in outer space, can you imagine the effect that Albert Einstein had on this kind of a perspective? Before, remember, very old times, and even in the Bible, we speak of the earth as the center of the universe. Now, after Copernicus, after Galileo, we find out, we find out that Earth is not the center of the universe. It is the sun that is the center of our universe. In our universe, it's not the only universe. There are billions of universes all over. There are so many of them. And we are only very, very small, very tiny kind of part of the universe. Now, that is something that we have, the knowledge that we have gained already quite recently. In the theory of relativity, for example, that Einstein had already, what do you call this, shown to us, is something that is so new in a way, because, and it corrected our old views. You will remember that Galileo was punished by the church for what is this, espousing his idea, uh, and only for the church to be corrected by science nowadays. So continually critique, corrected, changed, and renewed. So the more we think about it, the more perhaps we may be able to change, because that is the way things evolve. Can you imagine the change, the thing that has happened with us now, even having a class like this online? Was it something possible to Aquinas? Never, never did he would have thought about this, but it is something that we are doing now. Was it possible even for people who had the first ones to make use of the printing press? No, they would never even think about it. Now it's something that is very normal for us. But 20, 30 years from now, probably what we're doing is we're going to be something very, very elemental, being going to be very, very basic. It's no longer going to be, maybe our, what do you call this, the next generation or 2 or 3 generations from now will not be even using this. Maybe they will think of something else. That's how fast change is happening in our world today. So it means that continually we will have to be adjusting our our interpretation, because experience is changing. Okay. Experience is always an interplay between perception and thought and perception. So it's either way. Sometimes you have a good idea, and our good idea moves us to do something for others. But sometimes it is our involvement in the community, for example, that makes us change our idea. So, for example, we are a member of the pastoral council, okay? And we have an idea of how a pastoral council works. So we apply that to the BEC cell, to the barangay, etc., to different chapels, and we apply that. But then the experience of the people in the chapel would probably say, this is not going to work for us because of this, because of that, because we are limited, because we cannot we do not have access to the big church. We are prevented from crossing the river because the river is very high, especially during the what do you call this, the rainy season. We are not able as easily to cross. So we will have to change the way we would, let's say, do service in that particular barangay, because there is a river that hinders us from going through it rather regularly. So we will need to change our ways of doing things. So it is both thought changing our perception and our perception changing our thought. Okay. So in our own our reservoir of interpretation, a reservoir of experiences, we have interpretations there. But there are experiences, there are elements there that are what we would call from our own knowledge, from our own experience. But there are also experiences there that we have learned from other people. You may not have the, what do you call this, we may not have the first-hand experience of this particular matter, but we heard people talk about this. So, for example, we don't have an experience of what it meant to live during the Japanese War in the 1940s. But I have heard all kinds of stories from my parents and from my uncles and my aunts who they were living together as a very small family, but they were living in the farm, and they had a great time. According to them, they had a great time. I have no way of finding out how it was really like. I'm just relying on their experience. But when I go to that farm, for example, I can almost recreate what they were telling me. I will have an idea of what it meant like, because it was a very beautiful farm, very rich in you can plant anything there, and I can just imagine the happiness that they had there. But at the same time, I would not know what it meant to be hiding from the Japanese during that time. But I heard it from my parents. I heard it from my uncles and my aunts. They're talking to me about the way they were hiding from the Japanese. And so even if I don't have that experience, I have a certain knowledge of it. I'm able to make a kind of a judgment on certain things that have happened in the past and before. Maybe not directly to me, but maybe through other people. So now there's a theory that says that when we experience, there's actually a model of interpretation that we already have before we interpret a particular experience. That is what is this saying, that we have an idea of what it means to for something to taste sweet, or to taste as sour, or to taste as bitter. We have an idea of that. So that is a kind of a model of interpretation already. So when we take something and we eat it, we classify it whether it's sweet, whether it's sour, or whether it's bitter. But there is a plant here that what is this that we have, that it's a miracle plant. They call it the miracle plant. If you eat it by itself, probably it doesn't have any particular taste. But if you eat it, for example, first you eat a pineapple that is sour, and then you take a bite of this fruit. That bite, that fruit, is going to change your, what do you call this, your taste of the pineapple. The pineapple becomes sweet. It is called a miracle fruit. That anything that you eat becomes sweet. So if you have something very sour or something very bitter, if you take a little bit of that fruit, you it becomes sweet. Now, how is it? How is it? How how does it happen? We don't know. Maybe there is a trick that our buds are saying, or the fruit itself is doing. Doing tricking, for example, our what do you call this? Our taste buds. We don't know how to explain it, but that is, we have this fruit and we have tried it. So this is a way of explaining that we have a kind of a theory that tells us this is how a sweet fruit tastes, or a bitter fruit taste, or a sour fruit taste. So then if we taste something that is different from this, then we say, oh, I cannot figure out what is this taste. I don't know what that is, because I don't have a model of interpretation. So they are saying that the model of interpretation is something that precedes, that has primacy over a particular experience. To a certain extent, yes. To a certain extent, yes, because we have already gained a reservoir of, again, of experiences that becomes the model of interpretation, the theory of interpretation that we have been educated in, or that we have been brought up in, and that this is what is going to make us experience something new in this way or in that way. So, and of course, it is in line with what we know about theories. We may not agree with a particular scientist, but when he proposes a theory, but he comes up with a theory, and then after several tests, they will say, this is going to work. So we're looking for a vaccine for the COVID-19. There's going to be a period of tests and trials. So many tests, so many trials. There's going to be so many thousands and thousands of people have to be tested. And it is only going to be accepted as a vaccine for COVID-19 when it reaches a point where there are no other, what we would call, side effects, and whether it is going to be almost 100% effective. If somehow it is not, it is lower than, for example, 90% effective, then many people or many drug companies will hesitate to accept it as the vaccine, because the 10% is something that is very difficult to predict, and it might do harm to other people. And that is why when we talk about the development of the vaccine for COVID-19, the standard of most scientists is always 98, 99.9%. In other words, there's almost no way of saying this is going to be to have a bad effect. And that is why it's very hard to develop a vaccine because it takes time. You what do you call this? You improve on it, and then you remove all the possible what do you call this unwanted consequences. All right, now talk about a very important framework that we have is the idea of language. Hello, bonjour, arigato, hola, annyeonghaseyo. If you are Korean, annyeonghaseyo. Okay, bon dia if you are Portuguese. Okay, language. Why are there so many languages? Because of the Tower of Babel, or because that's the way we are brought up in. Everyone has a language. You go to Papua New Guinea, I think James is going to tell you that they have thousands of languages there. Why? Because many of the tribes are pretty much isolated from one another. So they develop their own particular language, a way of communicating with one another. And that particular language may not be known by the other neighboring, what do you call it, tribes. And that points to the richness or the capability, the almost infinite capability of of human beings to develop something, maybe a means of communication that is so distinct and so particular to a given situation or to a given group of people. And this is something that is very important for us because uh, we need to understand that when we experience more often than not, we need to talk about it. We need to talk about it or to communicate about it. And that's why we need a language. So, experience is always a language event or a speech event. We need to put it into words, into language. And so that's why when I am asking you to write a paper, I'd like you to put into a paper, into what do you call it, a language, what you have learned so far. So, so for me as the teacher, I will look at your paper and I will say, okay, this is what we have learned so far, and this is what so and so has written about. Then I would say, oh, it's not quite enough. There is a little bit missing here, missing there. So instead of giving you 10 out of 10, I will give you 5 or 7 or 8 out of 10 because I feel like you did not catch everything that I wanted you to learn. So this is the same thing with language. So when we learn one language, we learn a set of communication uh, uh, means or media or a set of symbols that we use in order to convey what we have experienced, what is in our mind, what is in our lips, and you can imagine that the more complicated a language is, the more extensive perhaps the language or the experience of the people, and perhaps the more intricate and nuanced the language or the culture of that particular people. That's why we always say it's quite difficult to learn French, for example. Why? Because not only is it difficult in terms of pronunciation, it's not quite the same as any other language in terms of pronunciation, but also it's difficult because you have to almost like immerse yourself in the French culture in order to be able to understand the nuances of the language. The same thing also with English. We have learned English since we were young, so at least we have already a kind of a context. But if you go to Ireland, for example, if you go to the English-speaking world, England, or maybe in the U.S., and they will come up with different kinds of expressions, and you have no clue whatsoever on what this is. It's because you were not exposed to it. And even among the English speaking people themselves, they have their own, what we would call, well, we usually call it them slang, but they are not really slang. They are what we would call the jargon, the idioms that we find in different places. In English, like Indians, the Indians, they have their own way of speaking in English. The Texans have their own way of speaking English. The ones in the what we would call in Boston area or the New England area in the U.S., for example, when they speak about New York, they say New York, New York. Instead of saying New York, you say New York, New York. So then, if you are not able to, I mean, if you are not familiar with it, you will not know what they are talking about. So language is a kind of an accumulation of previous experiences. And if it is a formal language, it is an experience that have already been categorized according to grammar, according to the way you say things, according to the expressions. Now, a living language is always a language that what do you call this? That imports new ideas, new words from other cultures, from other language. English, for example, English is very difficult for a lot of people because it is a combination of different languages, all the way from Latin, from French, from Spanish, from Portuguese, from the Anglo-Saxon, even from the Greek. They're all combined now in the English language. So and when you talk about the English rules of grammar, it's so very difficult because sometimes it follows a particular language where it is derived from. A particular expression, for example, derived from French, it follows the kind of formulation in French or the grammatical construction in French. And so that's why a lot of people find English so very difficult to learn because there's so many exceptions to the rules, many exceptions. And that is why for them, especially for the Latin people, for example, Spanish, Italian, French, they have basic rules that are pretty similar to one another. French, English, Italian, I mean French, Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese, they have pretty much the same kind of rules. They're based on Latin, but the nuances in the different cultural frameworks is going to to spell the difference between them. So language, according to Gadamer, Hans-Georg Gadamer, philosopher, is not only an object in our hands, it is a reservoir of tradition and the medium in and through which we exist and perceive the world. Okay. To experience is always experienced as part of an existing culture and society. Okay, so if you have an experience, and for example, in the Philippines, you have an experience in the Philippines. Why is it that we are Filipinos, we are Asians, but our mentalities seem to be very different from the rest of the Asians? I don't know whether the Vietnamese or the Myanmar people or the Indian, I've noticed it among the Filipinos, they're so very different from Asians, from the rest of Asia. That is because we have been what they call this, colonized by America and by Spain. And so the two countries have had extensive influence in our culture. But it is also something that is positive in a way that when we go to either the America or the English-speaking world, or when we go to a Spanish-speaking world, like in Europe, we're able to adjust because some of the practices we have or some of our customs are things that are already we have learned because of the Spanish influence or because of the English influence. Whereas in some other countries, for example, that do not have that kind of an influence, when they go to Europe, it's something that's completely different from them. And go to America, it's completely different, and they would not be able to adjust. And why is it that Filipinos are able to go everywhere in the world? It's probably because our own exposure to the international cultures is something that's much more extensive than maybe some other people. So we are conditioned by the culture and by the society where we live in. So whatever experience we have is sometimes expressive of the culture that we belong to. We are conditioned by members of our society to speak of human experience concretely is to deal with the culture of a particular society. So that's why when we say, when we have the creed, the Nicene Creed, the formula itself, we would say, I have no idea of what it means because we don't know the context, the historical context of the Council of Nicaea and the Council of Constantinople. You can only say, oh, this is the dogma of faith, so I will accept it. But the more we study it, the more we study the context, and the more we apply it in our own situations, the more we find what we would call a dynamic equivalent to it, then the more we will be able to understand uh, the truths of our faith or the dogmas of our faith. Now, at the heart of human experience is culture. As I told you, there will be a separate course on culture and theology, and Father Danny is going to talk to you about this and probably going to be talking to you about it in a much, much more extensive way. I'm just going to take up culture here insofar as it is part of human experience. I have found, and you will find this in Sedmak, uh, he quotes Bernard Melland about culture. What is culture? According to Melland, culture is the human flowering of existing structures and facilities, becoming manifest as an ordered way of life in the imaginative activities and creations of a people, their arts and crafts, their architecture, their furniture and furnishings, their customs and designs, their literature, their public and private ceremonies, both religious and political. So it's kind of a description of what are the contents of culture. We talk about ordered way of life. You talk about imaginative activities. You talk about creation, arts and crafts, architecture, furnishing, furniture, customs, designs, literature, public and private ceremonies, both religious and political. So everything that culture almost covers everything. It is a very good, what do you call this, definition, because it is a very descriptive kind of definition. I'd like to offer you, and this is what is found in Lodi Waston's and what do you call this, Joe de Mesa's book on doing theology. I gave you a selection of it on the chapter on human experience. They quote the Willowbank Report of 1978. By the way, Melland was much earlier than the Willowbank Report. It's a very good description because it is a very kind of a succinct definition of culture. It is an integrated system. So it's a system. It's a system. In other words, they are elements there are interrelated. But a system of beliefs, faith, articulations, values, what is good, what is bad, what is true, what is false, customs, what is acceptable when you eat or when you wake up or when you go to bed or when you take a bath, etc. Or institutions. You have a church, you have politics, you have what do you call this? University, you have a kindergarten, you have a family, you have a society, you have a clan, etc. Those are all institutions. The institutions serving to express these beliefs, these values and customs. But aside from constituting these beliefs, the system, integrated system, binds a society together. In other words, it is a way of bringing together the people, keep making them a kind of one people, binds a society together and gives it a sense of identity. You are now this particular tribe from Papua New Guinea. You are now a particular tribe from Mindanao. You are now a particular tribe from Bohol. You are now a particular tribe from Myanmar or from India. Okay, and gives it a sense of identity, dignity, security, and continuity. Security is you are secure about your own identity, and when you see someone who is from your own culture, you feel secure, you feel at ease, you feel comfortable because you know exactly where he comes from and you are at home with him. If he comes from your own province, you probably will be able to speak immediately in the local language, and automatically there's a kind of a rapport that exists between you. So it gives you also a kind of a dignity because you are this person, and at the same time, it gives you a continuity. It's a way of being able to relate to others, but at the same time to continue being you and not being absorbed by the other, being you. So it gives you a kind of a distinctness with others, but it makes you open to receiving other influences from other cultures, from other people. So an integrated system of beliefs, of values, of customs, and of institutions. I will just finish this matter about culture because this is important. So when we talk about beliefs in relation to culture, beliefs about God, beliefs about reality, belief about the ultimate meaning. Of course, when we go to religion, we talk about ultimate meaning, but about God also about ultimate meaning. But we can be talking about philosophy. Philosophy is what do you call it? A set of beliefs, but without necessarily talking about the religious dimension or the dimension of God. Values: what is true, what is good, what is beautiful, what is normative. So we have a value stories. For example, we tell when we were children, we were always told about all kinds of stories. When I was young, I heard all kinds of stories from my grandmother, but the stories always had a kind of a lesson that makes me understand why do we do things the way we do things. There's always a lesson, and that is the value of the stories that are told to us by our ninuno, by our ancestors, because it conveys a sense of who we are, and it conveys also a sense of how we are to behave, how we are to behave. In customs, now, the customs relate us with others, how we talk, how we pray, how we dress, how we work, how we play, how we trade, how we farm. So the way we farm, if we come from a particular group of farmers on the, let's say, lowland, then we have a way of farming. But if we come from farmers who are talking about mountains and hills, then we have a different way of farming. They don't have access to water from in that particular, or we have very limited access to water that way. So there's a different way. But why do we have all this drama, for example? Why do we have all kinds of singing events? Why do we have social gathering? When we come together for events, why do we say, okay, the first thing that we need to do is this, the second thing is this, and the third thing is this, and at the end, this is what we do. And when we go to that particular place, we need to wear this kind of a dress. When we go to a particular, let's say, a dance, we have to make sure that we are dressed in a nice way because it's something that it's formal. When we go to something like a sports, then this is the way we dress ourselves. You dress improperly, and people will be able to tell you you should not be wearing that. You change your clothes, you get something else. So, for example, when some people go to church and they don't have what do you call this? They don't have sleeves. They have, and they have some very short pants. In some churches, they give them the either what is a kind of what is this, a mantle to cover their shoulders, or a kind of a tapis to cover their what is this, their pants or their undershirts. So these are things that happen to us in culture. We are talking about the aspect of culture because this is really that part of our experience that defines a lot of times our own the way we behave. Here at SVST, if you do not know, if you're new to how we do things, there's going to be a feast of cultures here, and we will probably be doing it in the second semester if we are able to come together. The feast of cultures where we talk about the cultures from different regions in the Philippines, and maybe regions that or traditions of other students who come from other countries. And this is something that is very much looked forward to by people, because this is something that is very, very beautiful to see, the variety of culture, as well as food, of course. Institutions. There are institutions that we take for granted because we were born into these institutions. But these are institutions that have become part of a given culture, because these are institutions are ways by which we are in a way cementing a particular custom, a particular culture. For example, government. Why do we have this kind of government rather than dictatorship? Okay, it's because we have been brought in this kind of country or democratic ideals, and this is how we behave. For example, in regard to churches, okay, why do we have the Catholic Church and not, let's say, the Protestant Church? Primarily the Protestant Church. It's because these are the institutions that have been, what do you call this, founded by our ninuno, by our forefathers. For example, the friars, the Spanish friars, they have brought the institution of the Catholic Church, and that is what we have we have been born into, and that this is what we many of us continue to respect and to have. Institution of the family, the institution of schools, hospitals, factories, shops, unions, clubs. There are some exclusive clubs. There are some clubs that are open to everybody. So if you belong to an exclusive club, you just not just anybody can go in there. You have to be able to show your credentials in order for you to be accepted to a particular uh, club. Again, the goals and the objectives is for the society or the community's unity, identity, dignity, security, and continuity. Culture always has a purpose. And the purpose of culture is to give us all of these things, make us a one people, gives us a certain identity in relation to the other cultures or people of other cultures. And because we are of one culture, we have a particular dignity that should be respected by the other groups, by other tribes. And in our own identity, we are able to feel secure because we know exactly how to behave. When you are among Filipinos, you know how to behave. You don't have to be telling people, this is what I expect you to do, because you don't need to tell me what you expect to do, because I know what you expect to what you I know what you want, because I belong to the same tribe, I belong to the same group of people as you. And in that sense, there's a kind of a continuity. Okay, let me start.